Hey, what's going on? It's B the Installer. I'm here to show you specifically how to take your TV off the wall or uninstall it, and the proper way to take the mount off the wall, and then I'm going to show you how to repair the wall in case you need to repair it when you're moving out of a place, or if you're just going to switch the TV to a different wall, how to make it look clean again if you're going to paint or whatever. So I'm going to go over all those things in this video. Probably going to be the most comprehensive way to do this, so I hope it's helpful. Smash the like button if it is, and make sure to subscribe to get videos like this on TVs, mounting, unmounting, and also, reviews and things like that. So let's get to the video on how to properly take your TV off the wall and fix the wall. So whether you have a arm mount like this or you have it flat against the wall, the method is pretty much the same, and you're not going to need to remove the bolts out of the wall first and put this TV at risk and have someone hold this. That's never the way to go. So only in very, very rare instances with very small and very cheap mounts do they only have the mechanism where you put it on as you go with the TV mounted, or you have to disconnect from the back of the TV. But there's always some sort of mechanism where the TV's sitting on something. It's sitting on an arm and you take it off, or it's sitting on brackets and you take it off. So don't think that you need to unscrew and put yourself at risk by holding on to the TV. You're gonna be able to get it off safely. And if you're not certain, look to a video like this, or ask a question if you have any in the comments. So the tools for the job are gonna be something like a screwdriver or an Allen wrench, which will be needed to unscrew safety screws in the back of the TV that are holding on, that are not holding the TV directly to the mount, but the ones that are pinning it up against the brackets at the bottom, or connecting it to the arm. So you'll need a screwdriver or an Allen wrench. Another thing that you'll need at the end of that part is you'll need a socket and ratchet if you're gonna take the bolts out of the wall. I also have this adapter on here that has a hexagonal that goes into my drill, so that makes it really easy because I can just pop it on my drill and screw them out. But in either way, you're gonna have to have something like that, or a wrench, just like a crescent wrench, to take them out if you don't have something like this. Another thing that you'll need is a good place to put the TV. So that's something you should think about before you actually have it in hand. I mean, I've done a lot of these, and sometimes I'm standing there with the TV like, oh crap, where am I gonna put this? So make sure you have a good idea where you're gonna put the TV, a safe place where you're not gonna scratch it. I have never scratched a TV or damaged one in transportation, but I've seen a ton of people do that, and I've seen a ton of moving people do that too. So, have an idea of where you're gonna put it. Home Depot sells like boxes you can get that are padded. I recommend wrapping it with something. You can also use a moving blanket to take it from place to place. But just always make sure you have a good place. A lot of times I put the screen toward the wall when I set it on the ground, put some sort of towel or something on it. But if you put the screen toward the wall, then if people are walking by it, they're unlikely to hit the TV. So just make sure you have a good idea where to go. So once the TV and the mount are down and you want to fix the drywall, you need some sort of mud or drywall repair kit. You can get pretty much anything you want. I highly recommend you do not get the stuff that turns like pink to white. Get something that's good, something that someone at Home Depot may recommend is good for repairing holes. I actually use what's called Westpac's Fast Light 5, and I have a big bag of it. It's actually in the 5-gallon jug below me here, but I use this stuff because I can mix it up and I can put it in and it sets very quickly and it doesn't dry up and crack. So I actually really like Westpac's Fast Light 5. If you use the Fast Light 20, it's good too, and you can get it a little bit smoother, but the problem is, for me, it takes a long time. It normally takes like a couple hours to dry, whereas the Fast Light 5, 5 or 10 minutes and it's dried and I can move on and flatten it out. And I'm gonna do this without making any dust, and I'm gonna do it without making a huge mess and no sandpaper. So of course you're gonna need a little bucket to put the drywall in, and then I have a 2-inch knife, I have a 4-inch knife, and then I have like a 10-inch, I think that's a foot, 12-inch knife. And I use 2 or 3 of these for when I do drywall because I stir it up, mix it up with this, and I'll show you how to do that. And then once I put it on the wall, I can flatten it out with the 4-inch or the 10-inch knife. And I'm gonna make it look real nice so you can paint over it. And for that, I also have, well, this is supposed to be knockdown. You can get orange peel or knockdown depending on what your wall looks like. Unfortunately, I tipped the paint over in my office, and so this was laying in it, so now it's painted the nice gray color of my office. you know, stuff happens. So all this stuff can be gotten at Home Depot or Lowe's or anywhere like that. And you can ask for help, but you know, reference the video, and in the description I'll have the stuff that I use, and I'll have it available for you to buy online if that's the best way for you to do it. Otherwise, take the part list with you into Home Depot or Lowe's, ask them what's up, and they'll help you out. And lastly, if you want to do this like I'm going to do it, where there's no sanding, no dust going around your house, you're going to need a rag of some sort. I just use one of these cheap like gym towels or whatever. We're going to use this because it has kind of the grit you need in order to sand it down a little bit, but we're going to get it wet, sand down the wall when it's needed, and I'll show you how to do that too. Going to save you a ton of time and effort, and it won't be so messy. So I'll get to that part at the end, but let's get into taking the TV off the wall. So before we can get the TV off the wall, we need to disconnect the wires so that it's not problematic once you have the TV in hand. Of course, you don't want to have wires pulling you back toward the TV. It can be dangerous. You can break an HDMI port. So get all the cords out of the way. So I disconnected all the wires there. So as I said, to take the TV off the wall here, it has safety screws right here. I'm not sure if you can see it great, but there are some safety screws right here. And those are the first step. You can't get the TV off until you loosen these safety screws and take them down. If your mount is flat against the wall and it doesn't have an arm, there are still either safety screws like this, or there'll be like a little hook you can pull down and it releases the bottom. But in either way, you're gonna have to lift the TV off the arm or off the wall mount first. So I'm gonna go ahead and unscrew these. I have like the smallest screwdriver in the world for this. Normally I have like bigger ones, but I might as well have an eyeglass screwdriver right now. This thing is tiny. Okay, we have the screws pulled down. They're still attached, which is easier if you're gonna, want to keep it, but you can see now the bottom can pull out, which is key. That's the part you need. You need it to be able to clear the actual, the bottom of the bracket. So if you try to lift it like this, you're gonna bang it into the bottom. So you want to pull the TV out like this and lift it off. So this is the next step. After you unscrew those and you have all the wires in hand and you have a place to put the TV, now let's go ahead and take the TV off. So again, I don't recommend you do this by yourself. I've done this a few times. So I'm going to take my kid's very nice Vizio OLED off the wall myself, but please have two people, have a good idea of where you're going to put it, and then lift the TV off, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, welcome back. Wow, that feels like there's a lot more room in here. So now that we have the TV off and it's in a good spot, we can focus on taking the mount off the wall. Now, taking the mount off the wall is normally pretty easy. In this case, it only has 2 bolts because I knew how this was all laid out, and I knew that if I put it on one stud vertically, this TV would be perfectly safe. I may add an extra hole or show you with the toggle bolt to how to clean that up too, because maybe this is too easy for me. So let me go ahead and take this TV off the wall. Now, you can, again, use a ratchet. These are 1/2-inch bolts, so you gotta find what fits for you and how you're gonna take it off. Sometimes there'll be toggle bolts that you need to screw with a screwdriver, but because I have the tools, because I don't have the patience to do this by hand, I'm just gonna pull it off with these. So go ahead and pull these bolts out and drop it. And then, when you're gonna pull the last couple out, make sure if you have 2 on top and you're gonna pull 1 out, it's gonna swing one way. If sometimes if you pull all of them out, the TV mount actually stays because it's stuck to the paint on the wall, and that happens quite a bit where you take everything out and the mount just stays. But don't rely on that because the mount could fall at any point. So be careful. I'm gonna hold on to the arm here or have someone else when you pull the last couple holders from the top. So I always pull the bottom ones first. That way, there's no weight on the bottom, so you can pull the bottom ones out, and then you can pull the top lag bolts out last, so that's the last one. I'm gonna pull it out now. And there you go. Now I have the arm mount off. Save all the screws and bolts, everything. Just save it, put it in a bag. Okay, now we're at the wall, no TV. Now we just have to make it look good. So this doesn't look good, obviously. And you could just put a little putty and go. If that's all you have to do is return it to the original shape, and that would be good enough for you, you know, do what you got to do. I want to make it a little bit harder so you guys can see. So I'm actually going to make one more hole, and we'll just do it here. There you go. And I'm going to show you kind of what would be a scenario that I'd come upon, like something like where there's a toggle bolt in the wall. So there you go. Now we have a toggle bolt in the wall, and here's our pallet. So now we have to fix all this, and we got to put it back to the original condition because that's what it says on your lease, or you just want to make it look clean. So the first step is to get rid of the extra plastic and stuff. You don't want to bury this because it's just going to look terrible. So in this instance, to pull this out, you can use a flathead screwdriver and pry it out, or I know that these ones you can actually put your screwdriver in and just hit it like that and it breaks it, and then the piece of plastic comes off this way on your screwdriver. And so now we have a 1/2 inch hole, which, you know, you could probably even do a 1 inch hole this way, where I'm just gonna like clean it up with the mud. But we have enough to do now, so I'm gonna start fixing the wall. And again, I'll show you how to do it in a clean way that's not gonna create a big mess, or you won't have to won't have to sand it down. So first I'm gonna use the large knife here, and I'm gonna kind of scrape off some of this other stuff to make it flat. Now you can either use like the little mud bucket here to catch the dust. You can also use like a blanket below you. Sometimes I use a dustpan to catch things. I use that for when I install TVs or uninstall, just, you know, catches dust. It's a very easy way to catch everything and then dump it in your garbage cans. I'll use this guy here to catch it because it's a little wider, but I'm actually gonna scrape up and get some of this off the wall. Now as I'm doing that, I'm kind of pulling up some of this old stuff here. It doesn't look good. They use some sort of bonding material here. I don't like that. It's just easier with mud, so I'm gonna keep going. Now you don't have to do this. You don't have to make yours look worse to make it look better. But the point I'm trying to make is that if I'm gonna do this and make it look nice, I'm not gonna leave big bumps everywhere. So while you're doing it, you might as well make it look good. I can't get it with that larger knife because it's kind of really not good here. Someone did a pretty poor job of fixing this drywall. So it's good, I can show you how to do it correctly. So I'm making a bit more of a mess than I wanted to, but basically I want to get it flat here. I can already bet you that the part that will look worse of this is the stuff that was done before I got here. Get this, okay, and then here's back where I am for the mount. So you may have like a divot where the mount pressed in. Sometimes you put the mount on really tight and it actually dents the wall, and that's what's kind of going on here from that other mount. So I'm gonna go down here and break the paint and the plaster and all this a little bit more. You want to get rid of all this stuff that's excess. You don't want to have these little pieces that are kind of, you don't want to have excess stuff that's going to fall out later. So use your scraper, get it all off. Got hit in the face. Wear safety glasses. Okay, so I've scraped away quite a bit. I mean, there's a little bit more that I could scrape away. Probably could do it all day to make it look perfect. There's a couple, you know, spots over here I'll scrape down in a bit just to make the whole wall kind of look clean here. But the next part after you kind of scrape away some of this stuff is to take a knife. Oh yeah, I guess I didn't tell you, you need a blade of some sort because we're going to kind of clean the edges of this so that you don't put mud in there and then have an edge that sticks up. That's kind of what we did with that other knife, but this blade now is going to give us a little bit better cleaning around the holes, and also it's going to give us a way to angle around the outside, so when you push mud in, once it dries, it won't be able to just push through like if you pushed your finger through. So there's, you know, it's going to attach to some of the edges, but what I'm going to do is kind of clean this edge and make it a little flat. If you hold your knife at a 45-degree angle or so, and kind of clean the edges, this like I'm doing right now, that will help you get it flatter in the end. Same thing on these bigger holes here. You know, clean the edges here, kind of give it that 45 and go around the different areas. And you want to get that dust out of there because it's not gonna, you know, the mud's not gonna stick real good to, you know, all this dust that's falling out. All right, so there we go. And then one right here, small hole. Again, it's worth the time just to clean the hole a little bit. Again, it's pretty messy from the old job, so I am going to try to clean up the wall where I can. And I'm gonna scrape these real quick, just with a knife, so I can paint this later and it'll look good. So now I'm good. I feel pretty confident about this. Now it's time to mix some mud up and put our first coat. It may be our only coat, but we're gonna put the first coat of mud on here and make this look nice and flat. So I'm gonna show you how to do that now. So the wall is prepped and ready for mud, and I'm gonna open up the bucket that I have. Again, you don't need a ton of mud. Normally when people that work with me try to guess how much you need, they guess about 2 or 3 times as much as they actually need. So, you know, I'm lucky to have this big bucket, but I mean, you know, a scoop full like this can cover all those holes easily. But we'll do a little bit more just to make sure. And I may put some in the wall to flatten out the overall area, and I'm gonna show you. So let's go ahead and take like 3 scoops full. And I'm gonna go mix this up. You just wanna get the consistency a little bit thicker than pancake dough. You don't want it to be like liquidy that you can dump it out. You want it so that there's no dust in the bowl, but you also want it to have enough liquid that you can stir it. And that's a fine line. I'll get some water in here and show you what it looks like. So this will just be easier for me to show you the process of how thick to make it. I'm going to add some water. There we go. You can always add a little more dust. But you know, take your time and mix it. I mean, don't take too much time. This is 5-minute mud. But there you go. You see it's starting to get too dried out. You can see that there needs to be more put in there because that's not going to fly, you know. Sometimes guys will bring me back the pan looking like this, and sometimes they'll bring the pan back looking like it's got soup in it. So, you know, give and take. You'll get there. If you have a little extra, you can always add a little bit more dust to make it thicker. If you have more water, if your house has more water, you can always add more water. And the more that you stir it real quick now, the less lumps you'll have when you put it in the wall, which will be helpful. This is a little thick, but I am making a video, and I don't want this video to take 2 hours, so we'll leave it a little thicker. All right, so now we have the mud. It's ready to go on the wall. Let's get back up to the wall and make it happen. All right, so we have the mud, as I just said. I'm gonna put a little bit on the knife, and I'm gonna start working it into the holes. You know, I'm gonna use this to catch if it falls. I don't want it to drop on my kids' hats below, which it's already getting pretty messy, to be honest, but what are you gonna do? That's why we have a vacuum cleaner. All right, so put them in the holes, push it in. You can push it in pretty hard if you have the holes angled like I had said, because as you push the mud in the holes, it's funneling in, and once it hardens, it won't be able to push in further because it's being protected by this plaster or drywall on the outside. This is a plaster wall, by the way. It's not ideal. It's the worst case scenario. Well, I guess people overseas and in concrete buildings will tell me that's the worst case. Over here in America, we have a lot of drywall walls, and this is basically what I do. Now, I did work in concrete for many years. When I was going through college, my dad had me working on bridges, so I've had my share of concrete walls. I know how to do them, and I know how to you know, install TVs, uninstall. If I get an opportunity, I'll do more of that. But let's get it on here before this dries up. So I'll stop talking. But basically, you can fill the holes up with this knife. If you want to get it on a larger area, we'll grab the 4-inch knife and we'll put some mud on there. Again, I did it a little bit. This mud's a little bit thicker than I probably should have made it, but you guys will have to figure it out what's perfect for you. And so, just so that you can get it on the wall is all that is important. If it's too thin, it's just gonna be really hard to get it to like stick nicely. If it's too thick, it's kind of here, I'm having a bit of a difficulty of getting it to flatten out. But in the end, we kind of want it to look like this. You know, you can always put a little extra on and get it off. Now, if you start messing with it too much, you'll get some of this happening where, you know, the wall will start catching the harder pieces. That's the stuff that wasn't mixed well. It's starting to, when I flatten it out there, that dry stuff is catching and pulling it all off the wall. So we got some mud on the wall. There you go. Now, before you walk away, you got to know a couple things. One, if you leave a big blotchy mess, you're going to be working at it for a while, because once it hardens, you got to use sandpaper or you got to use a wet rag, and it takes forever. So what I try to do is make it as flat as I can, 45-degree angle, you know, start working and making it somewhat flat. Even if it is not perfect, we can always fix it with a second coat. But look at how much mud I just took off the wall. Once it hardens, it takes a lot of effort to get that off the wall. So better to get it off when it's wet. And you can always even put some of it back on in an area that doesn't have as much. So you got to play with the wall a little bit. Use your hand behind it to flatten it, but you know, get that mud on the wall. Now, if I was to just leave it like this, it would kind of look like that way it was before, where it wasn't very good. So I'm going to scrape a little extra off. Even if it takes a second coat, I'm okay with that, but scraping that much off now is going to save you a lot of effort later. So, you know, I'm going to leave it kind of like this. I'm going to let it dry. You don't want to let it dry 100%. You want to let it dry like 95%, because if it's 100% like the next day or many hours later, then you're to the point where it's a lot of effort to get this off the wall. But if you have small holes like the one that I had here, and you come back at 95% dry or so, you can scrape a little bit of this off. Like I could scrape a little bit of it off right now. And the beauty of that is we can almost get right back down to where the other paint was. And by doing that, you know, I'll do this hole now. Like, look, piece of cake. That's pretty much 100% done right there. So I'm gonna do that for all of this, but if I start doing that now with it still this wet, it'll start to gouge out pieces, and I don't want it like that. So I wanna let it stick to the drywall in most places, and then I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna get most of it off that's excess. And I'm gonna then use a rag to get it all the way down to the paint and make it look perfect. So we have a little bit more to go. I'm gonna give it a couple minutes, let it dry, and then I'll come back. Okay, so it's pretty dry. It's probably 80% dry, so maybe not 95%, but I'm gonna start scraping some of this off because I don't wanna make it overcomplicated. I don't wanna make it too hard on myself. And if you have smaller holes like this, you know, the first couple holes, don't worry about it. You know, don't overcomplicate the situation. But I'm gonna start scraping with the larger knife first, and I'm gonna show you how to kind of make it look real clean with the rag, the wet rag after this. So first, I'm gonna use this flat knife, and I'm not gonna dig into the wall. I'm just gonna use it to flatten out the excess, any large bumps. So we're just gonna go over the wall and kind of get the big bumps. So that looks nice and clean. There's a little bit of a bump that I'm gonna get with the rag in a second, but these larger ones are a little more complicated, and I don't want them to look real bad, so I'm just gonna get at it. Because like I said, if you let it dry, then it becomes problematic and it takes forever to grind it down and flatten it out. So you can attack it from different angles, but you can see, look at how much I'm taking off by doing this now versus later. So it's pretty hard to get it flat. If you get it too flat, then you're gonna have to put more on. As I said, that's okay. But either way, I just wanna get it clean. So that looks much better already. You can change angles if you want. It's better to go the long way. Like if you have a skinny, long hole this way, then it's better to go perpendicular to that. If the hole was this way, I'd be going that way. Come at an angle. The more angles you use, it kind of just flattens it out overall, so that's good. So I'm going to go this way a little, go back that way a little. And as you can see, I'm doing that, and the wall is reappearing a bit. Some of that blue paint is reappearing. That's good. You want to get it flat. So, you know, in some instances, that paint is what's going to come out first. And if you go too far, you can always add a little bit more mud. I'm going to add a second layer in a second just to make it look real good because there's a little divot taken out there and there. So once you paint it, you'll notice that kind of stuff. And you know, people that made these holes, that's what happened. They didn't take their time to scrape it down and make it look clean. And so that's why you can see that when the paint's on. So I'm gonna finish up. Okay, so I feel pretty good about how flat that is. Get yourself to a spot where you're nice and flat like that, and we can clean the edges now and then we'll finish up. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get the rag out and I'm gonna show you how to do this part, which is using a wet rag instead of sandpaper. So I got my wet rag. I'm gonna get a little water on it here. You know, I'm probably gonna dump it all over everywhere. What you wanna do is get enough water in it where you can have a wet rag, but you don't want it to be dripping everywhere. So I'm gonna squeeze this out my bucket real quick. So there you go. So now the rag is wet, but it's not dripping, and if I squeeze it, it's not gonna drip out. So now that I have the rag ready to go, now I can use this like sandpaper in a sense. It's going to take up and absorb, you know, this dust and mud without making a big mess underneath it. So you can watch as I kind of rub around the edges. I'm gonna rub around the area mostly, a little bit over the top to make it even flatter, but I already like how flat that is. And then I'm gonna come back and finish this bump and then rub it a second time, but let's get to it. You know, and change up once in a while because you'll get all that stuff on there and then it becomes less effective. So then I just, you know, flip it over and work in a different area of the rag that hasn't got mud on it yet. And when you're wiping like this, you can actually kind of manipulate some of the mud and get it toward that hole that I have right there. And when you're doing that, you can take a knife and get it a little better. And sometimes you can fill that hole in. You know, it's not perfect. I'll add a little bit more mud, but there we go. We're pretty much where I want to be. It's pretty smooth. I get a little bit smoother if I add a second coat, so I'm going to do that. There's a little spot over here too. That looks good. So small holes look great, okay? We have 3 small holes. They all look good. So if you just have the small holes, you're almost to the point where you can just paint over this. But we're gonna put a little texture on it. On some walls you'll need it, on some walls you won't. But let me get a little second coat on this. So I'm gonna let it sit for a few more minutes, let this almost dry completely, throw a second coat on, it's a skim coat, just a tiny bit more just to make it look really good. Because if I painted these areas, I feel like these two you'd see just a little bit. So I want to make sure that you can't see these when we paint. So let's let it dry and we'll come back to it. All right, so we're back. It's been about 15 minutes. More or less is dry. I'm going to put a little bit more mud just to catch this layer of paint right here. And a little here too, and we'll smooth it off one more time, and then I'll texture it and paint. And stick around because I'm going to show you the finished product, and I know people are going to criticize me if it doesn't look good, so we'll make sure it looks good. But I'm going to paint this wall gray like my office, so definitely want to make it look pretty. Otherwise, you know how people are going to be in the comments, right? So I'm just going to use a little bit of dust here, put some water in it, and we'll get it going. Okay, so as you can see, it's still not going to dump out when I flip it upside down, but it's definitely, you know, it's got more liquid in it than it did before. So we'll scoop some of this up, and you don't want to use a ton, but you can always scrape the rest off. And this is basically flat, so it's okay. You know, I'm going to put a little on there, and I'm going to then use the large knife to flatten it into the areas. So I'm just kind of going to go over the whole area again, and where, you know, where it's flat against this paint, the knife should make it perfectly flat, and we'll smooth out any bumps that we have. Again, keep it at a 45 or less degree, like 30 degree, 20 degree. If you put it perfectly flat, you know, some of it will come back onto the wall, and then you can push a little harder and it'll pull that back off. And if there's paint, there's edge of paint, you want to go into the edge of paint. Don't scrape it away, but go back and forth. Get it nice and smooth. Even if there's a little extra around the edges like this, That's okay because we can lightly, sand it off, but with our rag again and make it perfect. So we want to get it nice and clean. For the most part, I'm pretty happy with where this is. Now I'm going to let this dry completely, take another 10-15 minutes, and then I'm going to use that wet rag. I'm going to squeeze it out really, really good, clean it out, squeeze it out, and then I'm going to use that rag to kind of go around the edges. If you are a renter or something, you may have to paint it back to the original color. I'm going to paint this to the gray that's in my office, so it's definitely going to expose any missed spot. You'll be able to see it. We'll put a little texture on it, but this texture is actually basically just using a roller with paint on it. There isn't much texture on this. I'm going to go over the different ways you can texture it in just 1 second, so hold tight. And then at the end, we'll get a nice look at the side view with the new paint and everything, and you guys can let me know in the comments how I did. So I have the wall where I want it with regards to the mud. All I need to do is use this rag. So again, I'm going to just go over it with the wet rag and get rid of the excess. Again, I'm not really going to go near the holes that I finished because I like how they're finished. I'm just trying to get some of the excess off. If there's a little spot like this where it's a little bit raised up on the edges here, you don't want to see that when you're painting, and kind of everything gets exposed once you put paint on it. So you want to get around. If it's an area where mud was not intended to be, you can wipe it all the way off, like completely off if you want. Get it all the way off. Where the holes are, just leave a little bit over the hole, like, just so it's flat. And you can even use your fingers to flatten it right there. That one's perfect. I feel good about this one, nice and smooth. This is another hole. This is the larger area. So again, I'm going to go over that just a little bit. I noticed that the biggest bump is still this area where the other TV mount was. I should have taken it down a little bit. We'll see how that looks once the paint is on, but it's not going to be bad. Flatten out this area, nice and smooth. And the reason you get into this area here is because it had texture on it before. So if you leave the mud in all the holes, then you're taking away the texture that was meant to be the texture of the wall and look nice. A lot of people's walls look better than this wall does. It's not the cleanest looking wall, but the paint that I'm going to use is actually going to make it look a lot nicer. This color is just awful. And when we moved here, this is the color it was, and we hadn't painted it yet. Okay, so we're to the point where we're going to decide if we're going to use texture or not. There's a couple different kinds of texture. This is Homax texture. You can get it at Home Depot. There's the brown one is knockdown, bigger bumps, meant to be knocked down or flattened when it's almost dry. So you spray it on, similar to what your wall looks like. Try to match it up, and if you have flattened bumps on your wall, then you take a long knife like this one. Once it's basically dry and you get this nice and wet and kind of knock it down, get it wet again. You can use a rag to get that rag really wet and put some moisture on the knife, and then you put it really flat and knock it down, basically right as it dries, as it's finished drying. This wall is basically just like orange peel, or even you could just use, if you're rolling paint on, the paint roller has a little bit of grit to it itself. So honestly, I could get away with just using a paint roller on this. I'm going to use this knockdown. I don't have any orange peel with me, but I'm going to use this knockdown. It's kind of an art. I stand back a bit. I get it very like a tight nozzle, so it's spraying at a high pressure, and stand far away, and it really coats the wall well. I'm going to test it out by putting the most pressure I can on this to make it very fine and see if I like the way that it looks on the wall. If not, I may just wipe it off and just use a roller in a little bit when I paint. So shake it up. It's like a shake weight. The more you shake it, the more pressure, the better it looks. If I was just to go up to the wall and spray, it's gonna look like crap. Like, watch. That's not gonna fly, right? I mean, it's a big goopy mess, and nobody wants that on their wall. So, like I said, there's an art to it. If you wanna get a small area done, what I do is I start spraying somewhere else and let that clump, and then once it's on a good stream coming out, then I move it to the spot really quickly where I want the texture. I'll show you what I do. I kind of stand back here, start spraying, and then move it over real quick. there you go. And so, you know, the area that I started got a little too thick over here, but then when I got to the area that I wanted to look nice, it worked perfectly. So let me give you a close-up of that. As you can see, the texture works okay. It's not too bad actually. And the bumps always dehydrate, so you want to have it slightly bumpier than it was. Like if you look up here, you can see that that's really ugly shiny paint. I mean, I don't know why they were painting it with eggshell type paint in a bedroom, but that's why we're painting it with a flat. So there you go, that's the bumps we had, but then we're working on something like this. And I think that will blend in nicely. Now, this area right here, you can see that glop right there. Obviously, you don't want to leave something like that on the wall. And you can actually take this off with a rag or even with your finger and you can dab it off. Not like my son dabs, but go ahead and just use a rag. There you go. And this one right here, if you see, you know, just kind of touch the wall up. Don't overdo it because the more you mess with your wall, the worse it's going to be. So I like this overall how it looks. Everything is to where I think it should be in order to paint. Now we have to let it dry. This texture does not dry at a particularly fast pace. And the mud that is supposed to be 5-minute mud, as you can see underneath, is still a off-white color, which means it's not dry. So I'm gonna let it sit for a couple hours and I'm gonna paint this wall and show you the finished product. All right, it's pretty much dry all the way through. It's been a couple hours. You can still see with even 5-minute mud, there's a little bit that looks like it's still not completely dry, but I'm gonna go ahead and paint this so you guys can see the finished product. If you want to smooth it out, you could still like take a dry rag or wet rag or something and smooth it down a little more. But overall, I like where it sits and I think it's going to look great with paint. So I'm going to go ahead and slop some paint on. When you're using a paint roller, it's going to leave a little bit of texture on, but also this stuff really sucks paint up. So it's going to really utilize this paint and really, you know, it's going to take the moisture out of this paint really quickly. So.
Two hours later.
Ooh, looks pretty good. I don't know if you guys can, but I can't really tell where that TV was. Okay, well, you can't really tell where that TV was any longer. It looks pretty good. I hope yours looks as good as this. Make sure to smash the like button so more people can see videos like this. Subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when I upload more videos like this. And just like that, we can all be the installer.